So as Helen said, I'm with digital onboarding, but prior to joining that firm, I spent the last 18 years in the banking industry. So I've done things primarily marketing, sales, and also the retail channel. I've done digital transformations, branch transformations. So for many of you, I know we have a lot of different functionalities in the room today, but sort of have been there, done that for the past 18 years. My presentation today is called What Does Your Welcome Mat Say? And I had a little bit of fun trying to find some cool welcome mats. My favorite is, unless you're Amazon a babysitter or Joanna Gaines, I'm not home. I might actually buy that one. I thought that was pretty funny. And the other interesting thing about me is I do have a little bit of Italian in me. I do talk with my hands, and I had no idea they were going to give me two things to hold. So if I stop, it's because my hands are being held up. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about engagement, and that's what my presentation is all about, is early engagement with your new customers or members. And we're going to talk about why that matters. We're going to talk a little bit about what financial institutions are doing today, but that's going to be the quick part of the presentation. The meat and potatoes of this presentation is building an effective onboarding program. So whether you don't have one at your financial institution today, or if you have one but you're not looking to potentially upgrade that a little bit, I'll give you some pointers there. And then hopefully, if we have enough time, I have a sort of little bonus down here talking about onboarding new customers that come to you by way of an acquisition, which is a little bit different. So one of the things that I now get to talk to banks and credit unions up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and most of them are marketing retail folks, but usually I ask them when we get started, do you know how many checking accounts you've opened in the past month, quarter, year, or whatever? And if they don't know it off the top of their head, they tell me, oh yeah, you know, I could find that out pretty quickly. And then I ask them the next question. And the next question is, do you know how many of those accounts have activated their debit card and signed up for online banking and download that mobile app and switched over the direct deposit and all those additional things that that customer needs to do or member needs to do? And it's universally deer in the headlights. Well, I don't know, it's kind of hard to get to that information. And arguably, that's the more important metric that banks and credit unions should be looking at, but it's often overlooked. So if anything, just sort of think of that as that just because you open up that new checking account, that is not a relationship yet. You have an account, and that's all you have. Your work is not done, and we're going to talk about how you need to sort of rethink that. So, and here's why. Originally, I think onboarding programs were thought of as, you know, we want to make sure we welcome our new customer and we thank them for their business, which is great. We should be doing that. But here's why you need to do more. This is a visual depiction of a study that Javelin did a couple of years ago. And there's a lot of information on this chart, but I'm going to try to shorthand it for you. So starting on the left, they came up with a number of $300 cost per acquisition per checking account. Now, I have to tell you, I thought that was a little high, personally. But even if it was $100, that's a pretty big investment that banks and credit unions are making to get the person to walk in the door and open the account. Then they said you have 90 days or 3 months to go from new account to getting that person fully activated, which is a pretty short window. Because after that, the odds are it's not going to happen. And then what the study really sought to do was look at what products and services does this new customer or new member need to have to sort of think of your financial institution as their primary financial institution, because that's ultimately what you want. You don't just want a checking account, you want a new customer or member that is fully going to engage with your institution. So they determined that having money come in, right, direct deposit, and having money go out either through online bill pay or purchases through a debit card, those three things marked, in all likelihood, a customer who was fully utilizing your institution. Now, I think if they actually field this study today, I would likely see mobile app, using a mobile app as also an indication that that person is fully utilizing their account. But at the time they did the study, that was not one of them. So what they said was, okay, if that customer is using all three of those things, on average, they will contribute just shy of $4,400 in profit to your institution over the lifetime of that account. If they're active, which means they're only maybe doing one or two of those things, that profitability contribution drops to $420. So clearly, if we could just get some of those active customers into the fully engaged bucket, that's a 10-time increase in the profitability of that relationship. And of course, the inactive folks, they came in, they opened the account, they did nothing. They're actually costing your financial institution money, right? You got to keep them on the core. Got to generate a statement. Even if it's an e-statement, there's a cost associated with that. You're mailing them privacy notices, and likely they're keeping very little in that account because they're not using it. The other interesting thing was they asked the institutions that participated in this study to stratify their current checking account portfolio. They said, well, how many do you have in fully engaged, how many in active, and how many are inactive? And this was sort of surprising to me. Only 45% of their portfolios are fully engaged. So let's just round it up to 50. That means 50% of the checking accounts that you have at your institution really are not being utilized. That's a huge number and a huge opportunity. So why is that? So we're going to drill down into a little bit about why we think that is, and we're going to take a look at some industry data. And I happen to think it's because we don't do a good job of getting that new account into that top bucket. So, onboarding in our industry. So, next couple of slides are from Financial Brand. If you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to find their website. They are probably the largest provider of content in the financial industry. So they do a digital banking report. They've been doing it for years. They ask more or less the same battery of questions. This statistic has not changed much in the past 5 years. They ask banks and credit unions, do you have a formal onboarding program? So after that new account is opened, what do you do? Do you have something that kicks off? 45% of institutions do nothing, which to me was truly surprising. They might hand out a sort of welcome packet, you know, when that account is opened, the person walks out of that branch and crickets, no further communication. 55% of institutions do have some sort of program, but then when asked if they felt that that program was meeting their objectives and if it was successful, a whopping 80% said, well, no. So obviously what we're doing in onboarding is not working. You know, of the institutions that are doing it, it's not really generating the results they want. So they drill down into why is that? So really two reasons. One is what I like to call channel mismatch. So this says, okay, what kind of tactics are you using and to what degree? That's this chart. And that chart said, okay, what do you think are your most effective tactics that you're using? So of course we boxed in here direct mail and phone, which are utilized pretty much a lot. Only email and in-person is above that. But you see they drop to the bottom of the list of effectiveness. So of course that makes perfect sense. We talked about how people don't answer their phones anymore. So all those phone calls that likely the branch staff is making to follow up are going right into voicemail for privacy reasons. You can't really leave much of a message. So ineffective, also expensive to scale. And direct mail, which banks still use quite a bit, it's very, very difficult to measure effectiveness. You know, how did I know that postcard that I sent out to download the mobile banking app actually resulted in that person downloading the mobile banking app? Hard to put together. The other problem is frequency, actually, and this surprised me. So here they asked customers, how many times after you opened a new account did your institution reach out and contact you? And then they asked how satisfied they were with that outreach. And this really surprised me. 5 to 7 is where satisfaction peaked. But if you think about it, if somebody has taken the time to select your institution, right? We now know that a lot of people are thinking about switching, so they've finally chosen your institution, they've walked in, they may have a lot of questions. And once they get those questions answered, and they go on and they get their account activated, that they're good to go. But in the beginning 3 months, that's probably when they want outreach from your financial institution. Yet only 16% of banks and credit unions are hitting that cadence. Most of them are doing much less. So those are the two reasons why we think that whatever onboarding programs are being deployed really aren't working so hard. Okay, so now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation. So I'm going to put up, we're going to talk about if you're considering building an onboarding program or have one and you want to think about maybe doing things differently, where do you start? You come up with objectives. What do I want this onboarding program to do for me? So I'm going to put up a chart that shows 3 objectives, and one objective that probably should not be included in an onboarding program. So anybody have any idea what probably you should not do in the first 30 days of onboarding a new customer? Any thoughts? Yay, you win. Cross-sell. And very specifically, when I say cross-sell, I mean additional products and services, a home equity, mortgage, if you identify a need. Now, if they walk in 3 days after opening their account, and they say, listen, I'm buying a home, well, of course, then, go for it. But in an onboarding program, I've identified what I think are the 3 key objectives. Welcoming people, which, by the way, most banks actually do a pretty good job, right? They send out a nice warm and fuzzy note. They might send an email. Thank you for, joining our institution. We're so happy you're here. We usually nail that pretty well. The guide part is where I think we fall down. And that's guiding them through that final activation process. And let's face it, as an industry, that activation process is super clunky, right? We have multiple enrollments. You got to check boxes, different passwords, different, configurations. It's clunky. Now, I know we're all working hard to sort of get that friction out of it. But there are some things you can't do for the customer. You can't call up their employer and have their direct deposit switched over to you. They still have to do that. You can't take their phone and download the mobile app for them. So there are still things that they need to do. And we, as an industry, do not do a good job of guiding them through that process. We kind of hand them usually a paper packet and say, hope for the best. So a good onboarding program has got to build in at least some information about how they can fully activate their account. And again, why does that matter? It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. Because if they don't activate those services, ultimately they are going to either contribute very little to your bottom line or actually cost your institution money. Alrighty, and learn. And learn is here, if we can get some feedback from those early interactions with our customers, that'd be awesome. Because that friction I talked about, if you could bring that data to folks in your organization, whether it's operations or your chief technology officer, and say, hey, we are losing people because it's too difficult to do this process. At least now you have some feedback and some data to affect change and say, having a password configuration that requires 26 characters is causing a big problem. And of course I'm being facetious, but can we look at a better way to do this? So getting feedback early on is also should be built into an onboarding program. So with an onboarding program, I listed here 5 things that you want to consider when you put this together. So immediacy, and we're going to drill into each of these a little bit. Immediacy, personalization, channel diversity, simple language and visuals, and KPIs or key performance indices or basically success measures, and be willing to optimize the program. So we're going to touch on each one of these real quick. So immediacy. Jim Maros, who's the chief publisher of the Financial Brand, put out an article not too long ago called "The Guide to Multi-Channel Onboarding," and he basically said the thing you absolutely have to make sure you do if you're going to do this is get out of the starting blocks right away. And he backed that up with a survey done by J.D. Powers that asked people, when did you opened a new account, when did your financial institution reach out to you? And they basically broke it into two buckets. One is within 3 days or after 3 days. Now the good news is about 2/3 of the institutions out there are getting to that customer and doing a first touch within 3 days. And if I had to guess, they're likely doing that either via email or phone, right? Because we can get that out pretty quickly. But 2/3 are taking more than 3 days to outreach that customer after they've opened a new account. And again, if I had to guess, they're probably putting direct mail as the first step. So if you have an onboarding program and it includes sending a nice handwritten note from the branch manager or some sort of welcome letter that's coming out of the core, and that's your first step, that would be the first thing I would change. It's taking too long to get to your customer to thank them for their business. Because think about it. I don't know if anybody's here has ordered anything online. When do you get the thank you from ordering something online? Instantaneously. It's in your inbox within seconds. Thank you so much for your order. So you just picked a financial institution, a pretty big decision, and it takes them 2 weeks to thank you for your business. That is just unacceptable. It's too long. So if anything, if your financial institution is saying, oh yeah, they opened the account, send them a nice little note, I'd pick up the phone. Before they left, leave a message. So when they get home, hey, thank you so much for your business. So immediacy is important. The next is personalization, and I just grabbed this quote from Dale Carnegie. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. People like to be addressed by name. If you are sending out something that says, "Dear valued customer," you're probably better off not even sending it. Honestly, I don't know about you, but I don't like to be addressed "Dear valued customer" or "Dear resident" or any of those nice euphemisms. We like to hear our name, and I found this study by the University of Texas that really dug into the psychology about why do people like to be addressed by their name, and really sort of two reasons. One is it actually helps them feel in control. And I had to read the whole paragraph to understand what they meant by this, but essentially, if somebody addresses you by name, you automatically think that they respect you and that you have taken the time to know who they are. And therefore, that gives you a sense of control, that you're sort of the one that they want to talk to, which is kind of interesting. The other is that avoid information overload. So I'm sure you've heard this 100 million times of how many communication messages that we are bombarded with on a daily basis, right? Your email, your social media, text messages, you name it, plus all the commercial messages that you come across. Well, something that has your name on it, intuitively, you don't even realize that you're doing it, is going to grab your attention much faster. So automatically, something with your name on it is going to rise above all the other things that you receive. And also, psychologically, we think just because it has our name on it, somehow, what I'm about to read, whatever the channel is, has been curated and filtered for me. Now, we could be sending the same letter to everybody with their name on it, but psychologically, we see our name, Dear Tricia, somehow or another, that content likely has been curated and filtered for me, whether it has or hasn't. So personalization is an absolute must in any communications to your customers and members. Channel diversity. This is kind of my favorite part. So we talked about phone calls and emails and how difficult it is sometimes getting a hold of people. The one area I think that financial institutions really need to get a grasp on is how to reach people where they want to be reached. And what does that mean? And this was pulled from, and by the way, I forgot to say, if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, get me a business card or grab one of my business cards. And the one that I will email you has hot links to all this research and data so you can get to the articles quickly. But this was a white paper done by Price Pritchett called the Communication Crisis in Corporate America. And it's a fabulous piece, tons of information in it. But I pulled out these 2 points. Communication is best received when we get it, where we want it. And then he goes on to say, right, our number one communication tool is the thing that everybody has in front of them is their mobile phone. Yet, in the, again, J.D. Power's associate study, they asked people, okay, your bank or credit union reached out to you after you opened that account. How did they reach out? Well, you could see quite a few email, mail, phone. Only 7% of institutions are utilizing text messages. Yet, when they asked the satisfaction level, it peaked at reaching a text message. So people want to receive messages where they're mobile. I don't know about you, but after a long day of work, I kind of dread opening my personal email because I know it's going to be filled with a whole bunch of stuff that I don't feel like reading. And somewhere in there might be an important piece of communication from my bank, and now I got to, it's easy to miss. Text messaging, however, there's immediacy. So I happen to have 2 millennial adult children, and if I want to communicate with them, the last thing I would do is send them an email to their Gmail, right? Because they'll never ever read it. And you can't call them either, because it goes right into their voicemail. And then what happens after you call them? You get a text message from them saying what you want, okay? And meanwhile, I just left a nice, long, very lovely email. Hi, it's Mom. How are you? I was thinking of you, blah, blah, blah. They are never going to hear that message. They text me right about, Mom, what do you want? So text messaging is also a preferred method of communication, especially with younger audiences. If your financial institution is not at least looking into text messaging as a way of communicating, talk to somebody in your institution, raise your hand and say, we have got to be looking into this. And to further put a point on that, does anybody know what's going to happen at 2:18 today? Yes, so the U.S. government is going to be texting all of you at 2:18 today as a test of the emergency broadcast system. So if you didn't think text messaging was important, I certainly would encourage you to rethink that at your institution. Okay, simple language and visuals. This is, again, another study I found that said, okay, what are the top things that are important to you when you receive a piece of communication? Top of the list, easy to understand. I've been in bank marketing for 18 years, and I can tell you that banks do a terrible job at being easy to understand. So, if you yourself write communications or you work with somebody who writes communications, encourage them to get rid of the bank speak, right? We like to talk in acronyms, DDAs, MMAs, AML, BL, the list goes on and on. That has no place in customer communications. So I'll tell you a funny story. Banking was kind of my second career, and I started as the director of marketing at a bank. And somehow or another, the president found out that some sort of communication that operations was sending out was a customer complained about it. How could you send this to me? So he called me into his office, said, I want you to get every piece of communication that we are sending to our customers, which a lot of it was generating, at that time out of operations, and read it and fix it if it needs to be fixed, because they were sending out form letters and all kinds of stuff. So I got this gigantic pile, and I started going through it. So I find one that gets sent out to people if they overdraw their account. And apparently there was a whole series of letters that went out, and I didn't know it. letter 1, letter 2, letter 3. So I pick up the first one, and it was pretty abrupt. They owe the bank money, so it was like, hey, you owe us money, and come in and make yourself whole. And then I had this very threatening line at the end. Otherwise, we're going to report you to the checks systems, CHEX. I had never been in banking, so I walked into my retail director's office. I said, I'm reading this letter, like, what's check systems? Like, as far as I'm concerned, that's either cereal or party mix. Like, what is this all about? It sounds ominous, but I have no idea what it is. So again, and obviously most of our customers who are probably receiving that have no idea what the check systems is. They may today, but this is 17 years ago. So make sure that your communication is clear, easy to understand. Get rid of the bank speak. Obviously relevant, error-free, well-designed and easy to read. I can't tell you how many times I get an email and it's gray text on a charcoal back. You can't even read it, right? Or it's super crazy fonts or anything like that. Make sure it's easy to read. There's enough contrast and visuals. I ran across a study that MIT has now clocked visual recognition, so somebody's seeing an image and remembering it or understanding it. They have it down to 13 milliseconds. Okay, I think that's faster than you can blink your eye. I don't even know how fast 13 milliseconds is. We as bank marketers tend not to use visuals. We use numbers, we use a lot of content, copy. Visuals can communicate something very complex very quickly. So if you're trying to communicate a product feature, for example, use a video. People love watching video. Now, of course, it can't be a 10-minute video. It's got to be like a 1.5-minute video. Utilize video. Again, a complex thing that you want to communicate. If you could put it in a pie chart or a pictograph or whatever, first of all, it cuts down on a lot of what you need to say, and it gets communication across a lot faster. And we talked about preferred channels. Last one, KPIs and optimize, which I didn't even realize that rhymed until I said that. All right, determining success metrics. And I started by saying that an awful lot of banks have absolutely no idea what their activation rates are. That's where I would start. Find out what that portfolio stratification looks like, right? How many people are utilizing their checking accounts? And that's your baseline metric. And then when you put in a better onboarding program, you can measure it against that baseline. So I don't want to know how many emails were opened, how many people clicked on the links. It's lovely to look at. Ultimately, you need to be building into a success metric the end result. How many more debit card activations did we get now that we have this program in place? How many more people downloaded the mobile app? How many more people signed up for online banking? Those are the metrics that you need to look at. And I know in marketing, I was guilty of it as well. I would be ecstatic when I got an open rate in. Oh my God, look, we got 43% open rate. So what did they do as a result of that? So you need to focus on, and I would suggest activation rates as your success metrics. And then test and optimize. Helen kicked off talking about different segments. I would suggest that an onboarding program is not a one-size-all approach. You might, for example, if you're developing a program and it's going out to a millennial, the first thing you might suggest that they do is download the mobile app. Whereas if it's going to a different audience, that might be the third step. So there's an ability to, build into your program understanding who you're sending that information to, change the content, change the frequency, possibly change the channel that you're using based on that segment. And I am almost out of time, but it's okay if I do 2 or 3 more slides? Okay, so that's done. We're done with the main. Now, before I move on, does anyone have any questions about onboarding and welcoming customers and some of the things that I talked about.
Who does it well?
Honestly, out of the banks and credit unions that I've met with, I haven't found someone who's knocking it out of the park. Larger banks are recognizing that they need to do a better job with activation. They understand, being excited about opening a new account is the wrong place to focus. Financial Brand actually has published an article with a few examples of good onboarding. Today, they primarily consist of email communications, where they'll have sort of like a dozen links in it. The only challenge with that is, as you all know, you open up an email, and 3 weeks from now, if you need to find that email again, it's a little challenging. But certainly some of the larger banks, and actually a lot of banks internationally, they're way ahead of us in many respects, but internationally have done a better job at that, welcoming customers. And I keep saying welcoming customers. It's not just welcoming, it's making sure that they become fully activated. That's the more important part. Saying thank you is a relatively easy thing to do, should be an easy thing to do. It's getting them activated that's critical. All right, I'm going to do the acquisition part really quickly. So I like to think, by the way, anybody's financial institution do an acquisition in the past 2 years? Okay, just one, two. All right, and it's likely, whether you know it or not, probably something that they're considering. We know that M&A activity in our area and throughout the country is, I think there were like 3 deals announced in the past month, one in Philly, so M&A activity is definitely on the rise. And I'm going to talk a little bit about onboarding customers acquired through an acquisition, because I happen to think that they have to go through an onboarding process too, right? They're moving from one institution to another, so they've got to go through an onboarding process. But if anything, and if you ever have to contribute to acquisition communications, this is the one thing you need to keep in mind. They did not choose your financial institution. So all the onboarding that I was talking about before, they chose your financial institution. In theory, they're happy to be there, and so they picked you, whether they came in branch or online. These folks that you're acquiring picked another institution first, okay? Now that does not mean they can't fall in love with you and be happy and all that kind of stuff, but you have to remember that, they made a different choice at one point in time. The other big mistake I think a lot of banks make is they make some sort of crazy assumption that all these customers know about their bank. Why would you think that? I mean, if somebody's at a bank and they're very happy, they're not walking around every week discovering what other banks are doing and what they're about. Even if you have great brand presence, they still might not know very much about your institution. And I think that's a missed opportunity. So we're going to talk real quick about, what you might want to consider. And if you're frontline, I talk about the folks in the branch a little bit, because that's probably the most difficult job ever, is going through conversion weekend, or as I like to call it, confusion weekend, and on day one being that branch staff, and it's tough. Now, a good communications program can make that process or that day a little less crazy. I'm not going to say it's not going to be a crazy day, but and here's why it usually doesn't work. Merger communications usually get stripped down to 2 pieces. Warm, fuzzy welcome letter from the CEO, which, by the way, you should do, because that goes out right away. It should be filled with information about your financial institution. That's the first opportunity you can tell them about your institution, what wonderful things you do in the community, at least introduce, who you are to them, and that's often overlooked. And then crickets for like months. And then they get the 5-pound conversion packet, right? Which is jam-packed with disclosures and all sorts of things, and of course the dreaded conversion weekend timeline of when things are going to be shut down and all that kind of stuff. And when do they get the conversion packet? Well, about 30 days before conversion weekend, okay? I think legally they have to receive that about 30 days prior to the switch of the accounts. So what happens is, I don't know about you, you get a big piece, and you know that it's probably important. You probably should read all the stuff in it, but do you know? And then it gets lost somewhere in your house. So unless you've actually put that date in your phone or in a calendar, what are the odds that you think that these people are going to remember that you're shutting down their ATM card for a whole weekend? Okay, this doesn't work anymore. And yet it surprises me how many institutions think, oh, well, we can only afford 2 pieces of mail. What about email? What about text message? There's tons of ways to be able to communicate with your newly acquired customers. And here's why this matters. Gallup did a study. They looked at, and we only have 2 slides left, and then you can go eat. But they took a deep dive into a bunch of mergers and acquisitions that took place over a relatively short period of time, but I think they looked at 20 different acquisitions. And they talked to the people who had been acquired and came up with a whole bunch of insights, which was absolutely fabulous. But this one I thought was particularly telling. And basically, they compared level of engagement at the acquiring bank and at the acquired bank. Now, if you're doing the acquiring and you do a better job at customer engagement than the bank you're acquiring, your attrition rate is going to be somewhere around 6%, which is only 1% higher than sort of the average attrition rate. But if the flip side is true, that the bank you're acquiring is doing a better job than you are at customer engagement, they saw attrition rates soar to 10%. That's huge in a deal. And that all had to do with communication. So it's not just, of course, it's about the numbers and cents in an acquisition. Absolutely. Deal's got to make sense. But once that deal gets signed, communications could be a critical impacting factor. So if you're thinking about merger communications or onboarding those new customers, the first 3 things are actually pretty similar to a regular onboarding program, right? Early and frequent communications, personalization is important, channel diversity is important. But then I added 2 other things, clear outline of what's going to happen. There's this belief that the conversion weekend stuff, like when things are going to happen, you don't want to tell anybody too far in advance because somehow that's going to spook people. Well, I don't know about you. I'd rather be informed than surprised. Okay. But there's this reticence to put that information out there too early. I think the more time that you give people to sort of understand what's going to happen, the better. So get that up on a website right away. Well-trained and empowered staff. So I've been through 6 acquisitions. Yay me! I've been bought 3 times, and I was at an institution that bought either, not necessarily a bank, but different things, finance companies, etc. So I've done it, been on both sides 3 times. Your staff is critical. And the staff, if you're the staff at the acquired bank, you are going through a lot, right? You have a new employer. You might know that some of the people that you worked with for a very long time are not staying with the institution. You have a whole bunch of new systems that you have to learn. And then you get handed some sort of binder, if you're lucky, with all kinds of FAQs, in no particular order, by the way, that you have to learn so that on day 1 after conversion, if somebody walks in and something didn't work, you need to know what to do. That's a lot. That's a lot to internalize, usually within a 3-month period of time. And what I would encourage, and now some banks actually, or credit unions, put a representative in the acquired bank's branch, which is good. That's a good start. But they hand out paper, and they actually do not train the staff. I have yet to see anyone actually go in and practice with them. Okay, day one, here are the 6 likely complaints you're going to get. Do you know what to do? Practice it. Because I tell you what, they eventually get good at it, but it's not day one. By around day 6, they're used to the complaints, so they know exactly what to do. But wouldn't that be great if they could do that on day 1? Because if someone walks in and they get the runaround that you pointed out, what do you think the odds are that they're going to stay with the institution? Right? So if they want the answer, they want it right away, and if that staff member has not been trained appropriately, not going to bode well for your institution. Okay, so last slide, and thank you. This was from our Chief Marketing Officer, so hopefully today we learned a little bit that a new account is just that. It's a new account. It's not a relationship yet. Your financial institution has the opportunity to turn it into a profitable, long-lasting relationship or potentially lose money. And really thinking more of a customer-centric approach to onboarding, hopefully is what I left you with today. I would even go so far as if your financial institution is incenting on new checking accounts, I'd probably change that to new fully activated checking accounts, because that's what matters to your financial institution in the end. Thank you again. I can smell lunch. It was my pleasure to be here, and grab a card if you'd like a copy of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So lunch is here. Certainly help yourselves. Take out time to talk to one another a little bit more about some of the things we talked about so far, and